Vice President Mike Pence is attending the Summit of Americas underway this weekend in Lima, Peru. During a news conference there earlier today, he spoke about the U.S. airstrikes in Syria and relations with Latin American countries. This is 20 Minutes.
I asked our Acting Secretary of State, John Sullivan, to join us. Well, first off, let me say that because of the strong leadership of President Trump and the strong support of our allies in France and the United Kingdom, last night the United States of America conducted a successful military strike on critical chemical weapons infrastructure in Syria that has significantly degraded and crippled the ability of Syria to conduct chemical weapons attacks and a chemical weapons program against innocent civilians. This was the morally right act to take, and as I spoke to the President this morning, we couldn't be more proud of our American forces and our allies who conducted this attack with such professionalism and brought about an extraordinary success. The President's also made it clear that the United States of America is prepared to sustain this effort to reestablish the deterrent framework that exists in order that the Syrian regime and its patrons know that there will be a price to pay if chemical weapons are used again against innocent men, women, and children. I've been heartened by the support that's been expressed here at the Summit of the Americans and from leaders around the world. Many world leaders here at this summit in Lima have expressed support to me privately. Many have publicly for the joint action last night and expressed appreciation for President Trump's strong leadership in the efforts of our armed forces. So we stand against, as the civilized world has for more than a century, we stand against the use of chemical weapons against innocent civilians. And America, with the strong support of the United Kingdom and France, took action last night to bring our instruments of power to bear, to see to it that the Syrian regime understands, and its patrons understands, that there will be a price to pay if there are any additional use of chemical weapons against innocents. That being said, in addition to that topic, we've had productive bilateral discussions with a number of countries. I've met this morning with the President of Peru. I also spoke with the President of Colombia and with the Prime Minister of Canada and President of Mexico. We had, in each case, substantive and meaningful dialogue about our relationships with each country. The focus of this overall summit is on the tyranny and humanitarian catastrophe that is Venezuela. We appreciate the strong leadership of the new president of Peru and their country in formulating this summit around that principle. First organized around dealing with corruption, which is an issue I'll speak about before the plenary session today, and an issue of great importance and significance. Nevertheless, the United States indicated that we'll be supporting a declaration today that'll have many signatories here at the Summit of the Americas, condemning the repression, the collapse of democracy, and the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. I just completed a meeting with President Santos of Colombia, and he expressed appreciation for the additional resources that we announced yesterday that will be flowing into Colombia to assist their efforts to deal with nearly 1 million refugees from Venezuela. There are sham elections approaching in the weeks ahead in Venezuela, but as the opposition leaders expressed to me yesterday, the world is not deceived. Leaders across this region are not deceived. Democracy is collapsed. Dictatorship has risen. And to have in Maduro a leader that will not allow humanitarian aid into his own country as people are starving and people are dying is unconscionable. And I'm encouraged. I know President Trump will be encouraged at the level of focus across this hemisphere on the crisis in Venezuela. And as I'll express today before the plenary session, the United States is prepared to continue to bring all pressure to bear, working with our allies until democracy in Venezuela is restored. With that, I'd be happy to take questions about what's on your mind. Please.
Vice President Pence, how concerned are you about retaliation from Syria and its allies, Iran and Russia? And did you take that into any consideration when you're planning targets? Did you specifically target any of their assets?
Well, I can assure you that any time that our Commander-in-Chief puts armed forces in harm's way, we consider every potential response by the enemy. And every eventuality was explored over the past week, and we continue to monitor the environment in the region very, very carefully. The United States is ready to respond, to defend our forces. And to be clear, the United States is also ready to take additional action in a sustained way to ensure that Syria understands there will be a price to pay if they ever use chemical weapons again. But we carefully examined the possibility of a response by Syria or by its allies, Russia and Iran, in this calculation, and the President made the decision to target chemical weapons facilities, having counted all the cost and the potential of those decisions.
Mr. Vice President, in the year between the U.S.'s first strikes on Syria and these latest strikes, Syria carried out a number of suspected chemical weapons attacks. Why do you think that the action that the U.S. took last night will change the regime's calculus in any way?
The action last night, at President Trump's direction, with the strong support of our allies in France and Britain, was focused exclusively on the chemical weapons program, and we believe that it has significantly eroded and crippled the ability of the regime to produce chemicals that they've been using against innocent civilians. The attack a year ago was against a military base that had deployed that type of ordnance. This attack, the President made the judgment, was to be focused on the actual chemical weapons regime itself. And our hope is that Syria and their patrons got the message. But Syria should know, their supporters in Russia and Iran should know that the United States and our allies and the civilized world are prepared to continue this effort until we are assured that chemical weapons will never be used again against innocent civilians in Syria.
You said their capabilities were crippled, but they do still have the ability to carry out further chemical weapons, correct?
We believe that we significantly degraded their program. We believe that we significantly degraded their ability to produce chemical weapons. But this was also about reestablishing what we call a deterrent framework of working with our allies as President Trump reached out to the United Kingdom and France. Almost daily telephone calls, negotiations between our various national security teams to arrive at the targets, to arrive at the strategy. And then the President made the decision to go. It was all in an effort to do everything in our power, not just to destroy aspects of the chemical weapons program, but also to send a message to Syria and to their patrons in Russia and Iran that there is a price to pay if they ever use chemical weapons again.
Really? Mr. Vice President, when you talk about a deterrent framework, other than additional military strikes, what does that look like? Obviously, the United States tried in 2013 to cut a deal whereby, Assad was going to get rid of his chemical weapons and Russia was going to guarantee that. Clearly that has not happened. So what does your administration plan to do to make it happen in this case? And secondly, the president tweeted this morning, mission accomplished with regard to this. Do you agree with that assessment? And do you think it was wise for him to use that phrase given the history of it? Yes.
Well, first, let me be clear. The president's decision here was to use military force in concert with our allies to make Syria pay a price for using chemical weapons against innocent men, women, and children. And let's just think about that for just a second. I mean, the images have seared the conscience of the world and troubled every American. And this president worked with our allies to come to the place where we use the instrument of American power that is military force to degrade their ability, but also to send a very clear message that there will be a price to pay if Syria ever uses chemical weapons again in the future. And that price will involve the use of military force. That being said, we, as the president also said last night, while we don't look for an open-ended commitment of military troops on our mission to destroy ISIS in Syria, we are reaching out and have been in recent days to our allies in the Gulf states to invite a greater participation, a greater level of support, so that American forces, Syrian democratic forces, our coalition in the region that has been so successful on our primary mission in Syria, which is to defeat and destroy ISIS, will be in a position to facilitate a political solution. Ultimately, that's the hope, is that we have managed to restore a deterrent framework so that the brutal Assad regime understands that chemical weapons are no longer available to them to use without paying a very high price. But our ultimate objective is to destroy ISIS in Syria, but be a part of what will be a widening effort across the world to achieve a political settlement in the long term.
Yeah.
What chemicals do you believe were used in that attack? And why did the United States not wait for the inspectors to finish their work in Syria and to make a very clear determination of what was used before taking this action?
Well, let me say, all along the way, it's a process. When you're dealing with a brutal and a tyrannical regime like Syria, the ability to obtain evidence is complicated. But we went into this effort absolutely confident that the Syrian regime had conducted this attack, despite what some of their apologists around the world are saying, and high confidence that at minimum the chemical weapon, chlorine, was used in this attack. I will tell you that that investigation is ongoing, and we may well ultimately determine that sarin was in fact used in this attack, as it had been in the past. But the president made this decision with high confidence of our intelligence community, supported by our allies, that Syria had conducted the attack and dropped these chemical weapon bombs and ordnance on innocent civilians, and that at minimum it was the chemical weapon chlorine. Ken?
Mr. Vice President, if I could follow up to Julie's question. Did you think the president's tweet about mission accomplished was appropriate given the nature of this conflict? And separately, you had two very important meetings with leaders of Mexico and Canada.
Right.
What are your hopes for a deal on NAFTA within the next month? Do you think that's a possibility? And separately, did you ask President Peña Nieto to help fund a border wall? Did the border wall come up in your discussions?
Well, let me thank you for the other question. Let me say, last night, the objective of the mission the Commander-in-Chief gave our military forces and our allies was completely accomplished with swift professionalism. I was heartened this morning to at least hear initial reports from the Pentagon that despite have fired between ourselves and our allies over 100 cruise missiles, that there were, at this point, no reported civilian casualties. We hope that continues to be the case. But that was the report this morning. But as I said before, the President and I couldn't be more proud. And I think the President's expressions this morning were a strong affirmation that the mission that he gave our military to go in and destroy key elements of the chemical weapons infrastructure in Syria was completely and professionally and swiftly accomplished. The meetings with Mexico and Canada were very productive. I will tell you, with regard to Mexico, the topic of funding of the wall did not come up. I think President Peña Nieto understands that he and President Trump have a difference of opinion on that, but we spoke at great length about areas where we are making great progress. We spoke about changes that Mexico is deliberating over their own immigration policies that will impact transnational migration. I spoke, as the President has, appreciatively of President Peña Nieto's recent efforts to intervene a caravan of over 1,000 that were traversing Mexico to come and attempt to cross the U.S. border. And we talked a great deal about NAFTA. I will tell you that in my conversations with Prime Minister Trudeau and with President Peña Nieto, I'll leave this summit very hopeful that we are very close to a renegotiated NAFTA that will be a better deal for the American people and will have the kind of fairness to it that will permit us to go forward in a productive, mutually beneficial relationship with the people of Mexico and the people of Canada. It's not done yet. There are still issues that need to be resolved, but we believe there is a real possibility that we could arrive at an agreement within the next several weeks for a renegotiated NAFTA that will be a better deal for the American people.
All right, we got to go. One more.
Russia today condemned U.S. actions and has, generally speaking, it seems that the U.S.-Russia relationship has gotten a little frostier just in the past week over this issue. What's your message to Russia now?
Our message to Russia is you're on the wrong side of history. That it's time for Russia to get the message that President Trump delivered last night. That you're known by the company you keep. It was 2014 when then Secretary of State John Kerry negotiated an agreement that he would represent and that administration would represent, eliminated 100% of the chemical weapons in Syria. And Russia agreed to be the guarantor of that agreement. And now we see the atrocities, the horrific images emerging from the brutality of this monster in Damascus. And all the while, we understand that Russia has been standing by, aiding and abetting and supporting this brutal regime. And the time has come for Russia to join the family of nations in condemning the Assad regime's use of chemical weapons and demanding that they live up to the commitments that they made in 2014 under the last administration. Denying on the world stage, offering resolutions that were properly rejected at the UN Security Council a few hours ago is not a pathway toward a better relationship with the United States of America and the wider world for Russia. Russia and Iran are on the wrong side of history. And last night, President Trump called on them, as we call on every nation across the world, to join us in condemning the use of chemical weapons and again, restoring the kind of deterrent framework that will ensure, whether it be in Syria or anywhere else, that these type of weapons have the capacity to suffocate and murder innocent men, women, and children are never used again in the world.
Roberta didn't get one yet.
Roberta.
Go ahead, Roberta.
Thanks.
Sure.
At the beginning of your meeting with President Peña Nieto, the remarks seemed pretty brusque and to the point, and he made the comment in his remarks that there needs to be mutual respect in a relationship. And I'm wondering if he brought up with you some of the tone of President Trump's recent remarks about putting National Guard troops on the border and other issues. Did he bring that up? Was he angry? And if so, how did you sort of reassure him?
The United States of America has a strong president, and Mexico has a strong president. And when you have two people with strong personalities, they occasionally have strong differences. We talked about that. But we also talked about the fact that Mexico respects the right of the United States of America to defend our border, respects our national sovereignty. We also focused on the areas where we are working in greater concert every day. And so we spoke a bit about that. We talked through those differences, some of which we set aside for a later date. But I have to tell you, I left the meeting with the President of Mexico, grateful for his leadership, and more confident than ever that we are very close to the kind of breakthrough on issues of immigration, of drug interdiction, and of a renegotiated NAFTA deal that'll be a benefit to both of our peoples and will set the stage for much better relations for many years to come.
All right, we gotta go.
Sir, the president earlier this week.
Thank you.
Hi everybody, just a quick reminder, Mox News survives solely on your tips and contributions. It's easy to make a contribution or a tip or leave a tip at moxnews.com, or there are clickable links in the text body of this video. It should take the average person, most people, probably less than 2 minutes. Thanks very much for your time and your continued support. Stay cool Wednesdays, this war is going to end. Till that day.